finally peace has come, and the world lies at peace. My first name is Gerald Pedersen, but I go by Jerry Pedersen, and they tell me I'm 95 years old. I guess I am. And yes.
And you
in 1943, I was in high school graduating in June, and I decided I wanted to go in the Marine Corps. And I actually registered in March of 1943 and was assigned July 1st into the Marine Corps.
How old were you?
I was 17 at the time, and I'm 95 today.
Do you remember why you wanted to go into the military? What was in your head at the time?
I wrote a book, and I said in that I went in because I had seen Maureen O'Hara in the movie The Shores of Tripoli, and I thought she was beautiful, and maybe I'd run into a beautiful girl like that while I was in the Marine Corps. Now, I don't think that was really the reason I went. At the time, anybody who was in the United States was patriotic because we were in a war. And I had my three sisters all were married. Each of them, their husbands had gone into the service, the Navy or the Merchant Marines. And so when I graduated from high school, I knew I would go in. Of course, in that day, you registered for the draft and you would go in unless you were 4F or they couldn't take you. But there was no question I wanted to go in because I wanted to contribute to our nation's effort to end this war and return to peace.
So after boot camp, where did you first go?
Well, when I graduated, they had given me some tests and various things, and they assigned me to the 3-day program, which was to send me up to Berkeley and involved a college instruction that would prepare me to go after 4 semesters back to the officers training on the East Coast.
So you went into officer training?
I did not go to it. After 4 years, there was about 300 men went into this program at Berkeley. This was part of how many 100,000, I don't know, that did it in different places. At the end of the 16-month, we would be heading back to Quantico, Virginia. And at the end of 4, they made the announcements that of the 300, there were still about 100 of us there. Some of us had already been to it. Some were taken out of the program because they couldn't do it. There were 10 of us that were selected to continue on with further studies and specializing in engineering to be engineering officers. And at that time, I had all the college, all the education that I could handle at that point. And I and another person went to our commanding officer and said, we don't wish to continue with this. We want to get on back into the service. Partly because I felt guilty. Marines were going into Iwo Jima and Guadalcanal and all these places, and here I'm sitting in a university, but they said, well, you have your orders. That's your orders, and well, I did this. I did it. We were on for about 2 more months, and I went back to them and said, I don't feel I can handle this. They said, well, you don't have to continue, but you don't go to Quantico. If you don't want to continue, we send you down to boot camp. And I said, well, that's what I'll do then. And so in January, I went down there, San Diego.
And from boot camp, you find yourself on the Missouri?
In this boot camp, I went. We did a little training. At the conclusion of that, we went for some advanced training that we were going to get all. I had 7 days of it, and they announced you're going overseas because they needed a lot of persons, and so I shipped overseas, stopped in Pearl Harbor for a few days. We ended up in Guam. And while I was in Guam, there was 3 or 4 days, and we were expected to be assigned to and shipped to Okinawa because that battle was taking place right then. And about the 3rd or 4th night that we were in Guam, my buddy Don Burnside, who had gone through boot camp with me, the year before he had been at USC and was a freshman, but was all-American football player. When we got to Guam, some Marine officers said to him, we want you to go aboard this ship, and as soon as we can, we want to get you in an assignment where we can take advantage of your football to whatever teams, but we needed a second person. You got anybody in mind? And he came to me about 9 or 10 o'clock that night. We were in these tents out in the mud in Guam, and said, we can go aboard. It's a battleship. I don't know what it is, but hey, you get 3 square meals a day, and they even have showers on it. And that sounded good to me. And I said, let's go. And next morning, first thing, we took it off. And I said goodbye to my buddies. And 3 or 4 days later, we were up on Okinawa with a battleship, and we were bombarding our 16-millimeter, 6-inch cannons was firing, and because I guess the Army and the Marines had gotten bogged down, and by our bombing them, it was going to open up, they hope. It ended. Later on, I heard that when I went back after signing the peace, we left Tokyo and went back to Guam, and they had in the meantime gone back to Guam, and I talked to them, and one of my buddies from boot camp was killed by that operation. When they heard that it was from the Missouri, it was almost like they were angry with me. I mean, they weren't, but that was.
Wait, there are 2 details there, Jerry. Can you just give me these in a short statement just to be sure that I'm getting them correctly? Did you just say you ended up on the Missouri because your buddy from boot camp was a star football player?
Well,
in a roundabout way?
He says he assumes that's why they talked to him. And they didn't say that in so much,
Yeah.
but that's what he read. And later on, he did go back. When he got out of the service, he was an All-American. He played for the Cleveland Rams and later the Los Angeles Rams. Yes. And I happened to be his buddy, and he said, "Hey, come on with me." When we got on there, we learned that it was the USS Missouri. At that time, I didn't think anything. It was just another ship. I later learned that it had only been commissioned the year before and only got out into the Pacific about the first of the year. And so it had been at sea in the battles for about 4 months and had encountered all kinds of things when I went aboard it, because they needed 2 more people in the platoon attachment on the Missouri. And there were probably about 40 of us in the platoon on the 3,000 men on the ship. The rest were all Marines, were all Navy personnel. Later on, at the end of May, I believe it was, Admiral Halsey came aboard the Missouri as the head of the task force that we were part of, several battleships and aircraft and so on. And he brought with him, I believe it was 5 or 6 Marines that were part of his personal attachment.
What was your role on the ship?
Well, the purpose of the Marines in general is quite, originally Marines were the ones in AAA back when they first started, at the time that the United States became a nation. The Marines were the ones that went ashore in Africa and in the shores of Tripoli, which is what the Marine hymn sings about. That I'm not, to this day, I'm not sure what our full duties were when we were in. My individual assignment was on a 20-millimeter anti-aircraft as part of the team that was on that. There were 5 of us on that, and although I didn't fire it, I was responsible for taking magazines and putting them in. And every day, I had to grease and clean that gun to stay on inspection. That was my individual assignment.
Had you ever done that before?
No.
Was that the very first
No,
time?
first time I'd ever seen one. I had no idea. I had no instruction. We were supposed to have some advanced training, but I never got that. And none of us in the platoons, boot camp at that time, they didn't get much advanced.
So when you got that assignment, tell me, you walk up, what do you see, and what did you think?
Well, I thought first of all, I said I'm surprised that I was asked to do that particular task, but
tell me what you saw when they gave you the task. They walk you up to this thing. So what do you see?
I see a task at one of my buddies is in it where he fires, and
What is it? You gotta literally tell me, because I've never seen one. What is this thing?
Well, this is remember, a 20-millimeter machine is the least smallest gun on the ship. There's 9 big 16-inch barrels, the ones that stick out there, 16-inch shells that go into it. Then there are 5-inch guns. They're in turrets, and one's about 30 feet down from where I am on my little gun. And then there is a 40 millimeter guns that that are in a section. These are 40 millimeter is twice the size of the shells that we fire, but they were very effective in firing it at aircraft. Obviously, 5-inch and 16-inch guns don't do that. They added a few of these machines that honestly were not that effective, because by the time the aircraft were in danger from our guns, they were probably one of the kamikaze planes that were deliberately trying to ram the ship itself. Kamikaze is the type of air that the Japanese got into in desperation, that the whole plane, in a sense, became. And earlier, before I came on the ship, one of them had come in and had crashed into this 5-inch turret that was about 40 feet from me. I wasn't there, but when it crashed into it, the fellows in this were fortunately, none of them were injured, and they immediately came out with things and they pushed the
plane off.
I did not experience that.
That's okay.
but they told me about this.
Yeah, it's terrifying nonetheless. But so what was your first reaction, though, Jerry, when you saw the ship?
Oh, well, I was amazed. I had no idea this thing longer than 3 football fields. And but my immediate impression was, wow, it's neat. I've actually got a sack to sleep in. Of course, it's one of 4, one on top of each other, and I had about 2 feet between me and the person over me. But it was the whole. I remember going aboard. I was introduced to the first lieutenant who was in charge of us, and he gave us a little information, and had some others to tell us down to where our sacks were, but I was just overwhelmed by this whole setup.
What does it feel like when you actually descend into the belly of a ship like that?
You know, it's hard for me to try to explain for myself. It was I was part of something very big, and I had no idea, what my role, what my task, what my purpose was.
It just felt big and new, I'm guessing. And was it exciting or foreboding?
Well, the idea of being in actually being assigned as a Marine in the whole war, there was a deep satisfaction in that. As to my contribution to it, was very, it's just like, I don't know, I'm just one person, you know, I don't know. I always felt when we were called to every day, we were called to muster at one particular spot. When I stood at that spot, I felt good. I'm under orders, and I'm doing what I'm told to do. When we were called to general quarters, I had to rush to this machine gun and stand near that to be ready for whatever came. Well, I was on the ship, and I was there about 4 months prior to September 2nd. We did not encounter any action against us. And I never fired or was part of the team that fired at an enemy plane or anything. So that in one sense, it was just always standing by.
Waiting for something to happen.
Yes.
And so then, this may be the first answer. So the first battle you were involved in on the Missouri, was that the Iwo Jima?
No, not at Okinawa.
At Okinawa was the first battle you were involved in the Missouri.
Iwo Jima had been previously. That was
before you hit the ship.
That was before I got to the ship.
Okay.
And I got there. Okinawa was about the closest to anything that we had close to Japan. So obviously, everybody knew we were getting close to this being completed. In June, we had heard the announcement that the war had ended in Europe, VJ Day in June. And so at that point, the war in Europe was over. What remained was the war with Japan. And when we left Okinawa, we went down. We spent a couple of days in the Philippines. The rest of the time we were at sea. The last action that we were in was on the northern island of Japan, what's called Hokkaido Island. And again, we bombarded. Well, we were understood there were munitions things on the island that we were called on to disrupt and destroy if possible, but that was again something we could hardly see. We knew there was something out there, but this was all done by radio and so on, so that and at the same time, we were standing on our, my gun prepared to do whatever, but then you hear these boom and just as big as these cannons are, that was up at the front of the ship or the back of the ship, and I was in the middle, so
But you can feel it can you feel it in your
Oh,
heart?
yes, you could feel a blast, yes.
Everybody can feel that.
Oh,
All
yeah,
three of us,
yeah.
head to toe.
Yes.
So when, we're
And-
going to skip over this one.
but
because what-
It was about that time that for the first time, I believe it was sometime towards the end of June or the first part of July, that the rumor was going around, and all I could say was the rumor that the invasion of Japan would be happening shortly, and it was possible that we, the Marines, would be involved in the landing operations. Now, they hadn't done this in any previous time, and I realistically don't think we would have been. We would simply be part of the ship's operation. We would not ourselves have been part of the landing party, but we immediately, they said, you guys have been on the ship and you're not in the best condition because you don't get a lot of exercise. And they were having us do all kinds of exercises, jumping and all this stuff to try to be in the best condition if we were called on to go ashore. And so in our mind, yeah, this is a possibility.
So returning to this incredible event on the Missouri that you are about to witness, what was your reaction? Tell me about the hearing that the peace treaty was going to be signed on the ship, all those events leading up to seeing MacArthur board the ship.
Well,
just like a 1, 2, 3 of how that happened.
I believed it was shortly after the second bomb was dropped. It's shortly after we heard that the Russians also had now entered the war. It was after, I remember Gabby, our head of the Gabby sergeant, that he was the old-time Marine, but he was saying, well, the only reason the Russians came into it was that they wanted to be part of land that they could occupy, and they in fact did Machuco and so on, and that. But his point was, but of course they're communists, and they've been our partners in all this war, but of course they're really our opponents, and they're going to be our war now. And I'm thinking, oh, wait a minute, we've been fighting a war to end war, and already we're talking about one of our closest allies that has had more people killed than Americans have.
Okay, now wait, before we get into the aftermath though, what happened on the Missouri, just the day of the Missouri? So
okay,
you have this emotional event, the bomb drops, but then you also must have had shared somewhat in the relief,
yes,
in relation that this conflict was going to come to an end. And not only is it going to come to an end, but you are going to witness that moment.
Yeah. We heard that first, it was a rumor because we hadn't heard anything official, but that we had been assigned to be the prep where the peace would be surrendered. And then shortly afterward, we heard that it would be in Tokyo, that General MacArthur would be there, and it was one, it's over. We've won the war, and we did what was necessary, and we brought at least the killing to an end, and so that we had a part in it. Personally, I know that I didn't have the same kind of part that my buddies that had gone ashore in Guadalcanal and so on and so on, but I was part and had done my part in it. And yeah, I'm going to be going home. And I actually wrote a letter that day, and this is probably like a week or something before. My parents got the letter, but most everything had been deleted from the paper because any mail we sent that spoke about things that you couldn't talk about, and since this hadn't happened yet, they had this letter with this stuff deleted from it. But I had on my own, I had written some stuff similar to this about, I'm going to be coming home again. Won't be too long, and so on.
So now it's the morning of. Do you remember that morning? Like, do you remember it in detail?
I remember because, I remember that we came into the Tokyo Bay a day ahead, 2 days ahead, I believe, and then we went all the way in where we dropped anchor. And I looked out, we could see some things on the shore and so on, and to realize, you'd see ships that were sunk, in the harbor, and some of the land that we could see the devastation, and to feel that's done, it's over, and the relief that came with that, yeah.
So let me see here. I'm so sorry.
I started at that point. The shift came from, what am I going to do now? What's my future? So on. That I can't just take those into separate categories. I now, when I look back, I realize actually I became 20 about the same time I learned that it was going to happen on the Missouri. And I realized my day of, I've now become an adult. Now I'm responsible for the world I'm in. Up to here, I've inherited everything. Now I'm part of the future. That was the kind of feeling that started for me when I heard we were going to go to be part of this, and yeah.
And so
they got us up there where we're going to stand there, and first thing people were coming along every day of the day before. There'd be and much of the day we had to be up at on where the platoon always came, because various admirals and such would be coming up, and there were a few Japanese that came, and the individuals that came, one of the people in a platoon always went up and did a search of the person. They were frisking to make sure they don't have guns or something. And I think that was more symbolic than it was. Can't believe anybody really thought anybody could come on there with stuff, but that's the way it was. So it was.
And you were able to see that? You actually had to
see that the day before we started getting that. And that Monday, of course, there was admirals and a number of crews like this right behind us. In fact, as we were standing there before anything happened, there was a crew behind us. They were Russian, and so one of them spoke some English, but they were trying to get in a position where they could get some good pictures and such. And we were where we were, and we kept saying, no, you can't go here, and we were laughing about this because, well, they were laughing because they have to get these pictures, and this is where we have to be.
You're a Marine. You have to be there.
And it was there were several other crews around, and actually, we had more fun with the Republic, the Russians. There were three of them, and that was kind of a jostling thing. But I believe that one of them was a Dutch group, and they weren't accepting anything we had to say. They knew what they wanted, and there was some controversies then. That was one of the things that I remember. It's weird because Aunt Gabby was talking about those people, the Russians, and the Russians looked to me like Americans.
Was it quiet when the Japanese came on board?
Yes. It was like going to church, and everything was quiet. Yes, there was a reverence to the entire thing, especially with the Japanese, Shigemutsu and foreign, there's half a dozen in that. And they walked just right in front of us, up and then up these ladder, kind of the table where they signed and that was well, it was just well, when I think of some of the deeply meaning experiences of my life, they're going up to that, they're standing there, and then to see Halsey and Percival, the British, and yeah, it was.
Did you feel like you were part of history? Did you have an awareness of that?
Yes. In fact, I remember, I have a picture one of the doctors had taken, and all the different heads of our allies stood behind, and each of them came and signed the document. And can't remember, but two of them, I could see they kind of, it sounded like they had some joke they were laughing about. Now I don't know what would happen, but I remember feeling like how inappropriate it looked. I remember that as if, wait a minute, that.
Let me ask you this. Do you remember the ceremony? Do you remember the ceremony itself?
Well, I remember
it. Did you see the ceremony, Jerry?
I've read them since, and so that actually things that were said, I did not pick up in its territory. That was not, the speakers weren't such that I could hear that. The last thing he said, and there must have been, because I do remember hearing him saying that to us. And that's, I guess that was actually, that was after the Japanese had left, yeah, that I heard that finally peace has come, and the world lies at peace, something like that. And I remember having in my own mind, when I heard that, remember when my grandfather at his funeral, somebody could come and look at this, the casket, and said, "He looked so peaceful." And I remember my thinking was, he looks dead to me. I mean, and I somehow when even at that moment when they talked about the world lies in peace, in my mind I had, no, this isn't peace. This is just the lull. This is just the quiet after the killing is ended. But it's not the peace. It's just the absence of that kind of conflict. But peace is not. That's not peace. Peace is all kinds of things. People dancing with joy and having freedom and caring for one another and so on. And nothing has changed the way it was about these things necessarily.
Now, how did that affect you feeling, a lot of people probably felt at that time, I'm proud to be an American.
Well, way the way it affected me, and this was definitely a feeling I had right there that day, is some way I've got to try to make real what General MacArthur challenged me to, and all of us to. He challenged us. We've got to pursue in peace what we achieved in this war. That's definitely that was the meaning of this time for me, is that, yeah, the killing has stopped, yeah.
So
But almost everything goes on the same way.